Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 57 of the podcast. I've got a great guest. I've got Don Roley here, and we are going to talk about all things ninjutsu with him, and a topic that is a little bit controversial because a lot of people don't want to talk about it, but that is child abuse and sexual predators in the martial arts community. But before we get started, a quick shout out as always to one of my patrons, Philip Park, who is with me for a little bit over, I think, half a year. I want to give a good shout out to him. So thank you, Philip, for your support. Appreciate it a lot because it's thanks to you and the people like you who support the show and everything that I do. So that makes a huge difference. And anybody who wants to join Philip and everybody else who is supporting my work, easiest thing to do is just if you go to wimsblog.com/donate, you can just do a quick donation via PayPal and other means. Or if you want to check out everything we have on Patreon, that's patreon.com/WimDemeere, my name. Links of everything we will talk about today will be at wimsblog.com/57, the number. Because Don and I are going to cover a lot of ground, and we will we will probably have some links for you that you might want to check out. All right, that's it. So introducing Don Roley. Don, hi, how are you doing?
Hello, thank you for having me on.
My pleasure. Now, I've got a bunch of questions for you for the bonus section, but I think I'm going to start with the first one. And that's from Joe Killian, who says, "Hi, Don. I was uke for some of your Tanto Jitsu at Barbecue 2018. Thank you. What was your first martial art? When did you decide to move to Japan? How did you make that happen? What's your first exposure to Hatsumi's art? And how did you start training?" A lot of questions. Basically, all questions that I was going to ask you. So maybe start with the first one. What was the first martial art that you studied?
Well, there's a law in the United States that everyone has to start with Taekwondo.
True.
You know, it's pretty much a legal requirement that you know you have to go to Korean karate for start out. There's no actual law, but it's just like every corner's got Taekwondo. So that's where I started out way back in middle school. And yeah, so that was my first art. Did it for a few years, then gave up martial arts for a while. Until I actually went to college, and then what happened was, so my experience with ninjutsu started with Dungeons and Dragons.
That's a nice introduction.
Yeah, it's again, this was way back in the day before Stephen Hayes was a common name and stuff like, there was no movies or anything like that, but there was an article in a magazine called Dragon Magazine about the new character class called the Ninja. So, and I'm in middle school, and let's face it, for a middle schooler, ninjas are cool.
Yeah.
So I picked up everything I could at the time, Don Drager's book. And when Stephen Hayes came out, it was on the cover of every magazine. Of course, I read that. Then about high school, kind of, put it aside for a while, just not that much interest as I, gravitated more towards girls. Until I got a chance to go to college in Japan on a scholarship. And while I was there, of course, there's a lot of ninja stuff in the media. And I go, maybe this might be something that I can write about or, something like that. So I started, again, reading about it. And once I moved back to America, I actually hooked up with my American teacher in Bunjinkan. And Bunjinkan is an organization that teaches a variety of old arts. One of them, of course, being Togakureru Ninjutsu. Bunjinkan is the organization. It was not uncommon at the latter part of the 19th century for this master might be head of an art that was passed down to him, but they were throwing everything out at the last part of the 19th century. So he would find someone else who was teaching an old art and ask them to take it over, learn it and take it over, pass it down. So it was not unusual to find, like, if you take Shindo Musoru Jojutsu, they've also got another style that's jute and another style that's sword, etc. So the Bunjinkan is conglomeration of these arts under Soke Masaaki Hatsumi. Actually, he just stepped down from active teaching and passed along the reins to a few people. But I hooked up with a teacher in the Bunjikan in America, studied with him for a few years, and eventually made it back to Japan and had to relearn everything my American teacher taught me.
How did you get back to Japan? I mean, you said that you had thanks to college, you could study there. You came back to the US, started ninjutsu, right. But then what made you go back?
Okay, so there's a program called the Japan Exchange and Teaching Program, JET. And if anybody's out there's got a college degree and wants to get a job in Japan, I think that they're still pretty much the best bet for your entry in the door.
Okay.
Things might have changed. Basically, what JET does is run by the Monbusho, the Department of Education in Japan. And what they do is they recruit people overseas, do a bit of training, fly them in, and then you get sent to individual schools. It might be high school, it might be middle school. And you basically co-teach with a Japanese teacher and keep them honest. You know, it's really nice to have a native speaker to run things by, so you don't have these little strange English terms come up, you know. And that's probably one of the best ways to get your foot in the door in Japan. When I was in the JET program, it was for a maximum of 3 years. After that, I was able to find another job in Japan. You know, 3 years basically gave me a chance to really get my language down and pass the language is called the Japanese proficiency test. And I managed within 3 years to pass the highest level. And so at the end of my 3 years, I had a lot of doors open for me. So that's my advice to people, is probably find the JET program. And if you want a good job in Japan, study the language until your eyes bleed. Yep. There's plenty of people in Japan that, you know, do not speak the language. Anyone that can speak the language is just snapped up, you know, write your own ticket, basically. Yeah. So that's the thing. Learn the language. It's difficult, you know, but it is worth the effort.
Yeah, I can attest to that. I've talked about this before, but my girlfriend lived in Japan for 3 years, and that was one of the first things she did, is that she took an intensive course to study Japanese. And it is, like you said, it's different for Westerners because it's a very different language. You've got different, let's call it alphabets. That's the easiest way to maybe explain it. There's different ones. Yeah. So even first, the idea that there's 4 alphabets, like what? And then you've got characters, you've got a totally non-Roman, non-European view of what language should be. On top of that, it's a completely alien culture to many of the concepts, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Many of the concepts in Japanese culture are just completely, there's not even a translation for it. There's nothing that corresponds to it. And she studied really, really hard to speak, you know, decent Japanese, and then she got a job at the embassy in Tokyo. So if you don't speak the language, I mean, I've seen this a lot of Westerners, and I'm not just talking about, you know, you guys in the US, but here in Europe as well. They have this assumption that, oh, everybody speaks English. No, they don't. No, they don't. And even if they do, it's not going to be in English that might be useful for you. So yeah, learn the language. In Japan, China, Indonesia, doesn't matter. If you want to practice your art, just learn it, or at least have basic competency in the language, so that you're not, that the people that you're in class with don't look at you like, oh crap, I'm going to have to explain everything to this idiot again because he just doesn't get it. And this is the word for left and this is the word for right, and you don't even know it. So anyway, I'm ranting. Back to you, Don.
I rant about people that live in Japan for years and years and don't bother to learn the language. It's like, what do you bother doing here? One of my proudest moments, you know, that gives me a little warm fuzzy, is one time in class, you know, Hatsumi Sensei basically has classes at his Hombu dojo, the main dojo. And, you know, they use a center called at a Yase, big thing. And I remember we were once at class, after class, and everyone was saying, are you going to go by, Hombu dojo for class? And I made the comment, no, the place is lousy with foreigners right now. And one of the Japanese turns to me, you should, oh, I keep forgetting you're not Japanese. And I'm like, yes.
Yeah,
But
which is a big thing, because I mean, even understanding Japan for Japanese people who are born and bred there, even that is difficult. I don't think there's any country in the world with such an amount of complexity in its culture and language. It's very special.
yeah, and it can be hard to get, know what's going on. But I actually, after I moved back to America, I actually found out that I'm on the low end of the spectrum for autism.
Mhm.
Obviously, I'm not full Rain Man, like definitely not Sunday, but I do have trouble picking up certain social clues, you might say. So you can imagine what it's like being in Japan, but I urge people, just buy books on etiquette, find out things, like how to give a business card, what to say in certain situations, the things that are written down. And if you make small mistakes, the Japanese will be just like, oh, he's not expected to know. They do
Yeah.
forgive you, especially if you go to the trouble of learning the language. You're going to the trouble of learning the language, so you're showing respect, and they appreciate that. And they expect you to make small mistakes.
Yeah.
If you know to take your shoes off before you go into a house, if you know to bow and stuff like that, then you can get by pretty well.
Yeah.
It's small mistakes. Nobody really minds. As an example, one day I saw some flowers I thought would be great for my wife. I buy them. I take them home. She starts laughing. I'm like, what? And she goes, I know you're never going to be like cheating on me. You just don't have the skills as a Lothario. I go, what? And she goes, these flowers are only given as grave goods. I'm like, oops. And she goes, yeah, I appreciate, you thought of me, and, I appreciate the flowers, but next time get roses. Okay. And speaking of flowers, when I was still teaching at that first job, there was a little shopping center right next to the school. So during my lunch break, I went over and I got flowers, not the same one that I got more for my wife, just because it was I wanted to cheer her up. And I put the flowers on my desk at work. And the teacher that I was teaching with, she said, take those into class. Like, really? So I bring the flowers into class, and she says, this is what foreign men do. They buy flowers for their wives. I have been married 20 years. My husband has never bought me flowers. I'm like, okay, if I ever meet her husband, he's going to punch me in the face. But yeah, they do, women do appreciate flowers all over the world. Evidently, Japanese men aren't big on giving flowers, and it's not bad to give flowers, in those cases, but expect to make some mistakes, and hopefully they'll point it out to you so you don't make it again. But, they don't expect you to be perfect.
Yeah. And what I've found is that, and this is probably true in most cultures, if you're honest and friendly and open, that if somebody points out that's kind of like a really big faux pas that you just made, but we know that you're a foreigner, so it's no big deal. If you become very arrogant about that and just like, well, I'm a this, I'm a that, and I can do whatever I want, it obviously then you will end up being in trouble. And I think in Japan it's a little bit, I mean, in many Asian countries it's a little bit different than what we might expect. But before I go on with that, if you're just being a decent human being and acknowledging that you will make mistakes, and they cut you some slack and you're like, I'm very sorry, I didn't know that, I will try to do better. Like the vast majority of people will be like, fine, it's okay, don't worry about it, and you're good to go. But that kind of brings me to something else. We talked a little bit already, which was one of the questions, what is it like living in Japan? So we covered some ground already. But something else I wanted to talk about, and this is one of the other questions, like what are common mistakes Westerners make in Japan when they train there? And one of them is, this is kind of hard to understand, I think, for many Westerners, is that over here, if you do something wrong, the teacher might, even yell at you or tell you like, okay, that's totally wrong and this and that, and act a certain way. And when you repeat mistakes, they might act a certain way. In Asian countries, there's differences and overlap between different Asian countries, but he might not even say anything, but he's written you off.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about that, how it is in Japan?
Good point. Good point. Okay, so I think it was Ellis Amdur that once said that the equivalent hamon is just to ignore the student. Hamon is kicking someone out of school. And yeah, that's a big thing. You know, if you're arrogant, I mean, I knew one guy that basically thought it'd be funny to use a dirty word on a, you know, with a clerk during a trip. They took us on a trip, you know, showed us the prefecture, and while dealing with a clerk, this guy pretended to be, you know, to mistake the word for one that was dirty, and his contract was not renewed. I mean, you could do jet up to 3 years. He was gone after the first.
Yeah.
And he probably has no idea why they didn't renew his contract.
Yeah.
So sometimes if you really step in it deeply, they won't tell you, they'll just write you off. And in martial arts, the same thing. You know, if the teacher comes around and points something out, you know, that something wrong, then, okay, that's good. He cares enough to, correct you. If you know, this, I don't know about, you know, other styles, you know, Bujinkan is kind of unique that it kind of exploded beyond the point where it could actually be controlled, you know, all of a sudden the sudden fame. But, you know, if the teacher shows something and you do not try to do exactly what he does, he'll just work with someone that's doing their best to try to get down what he showed. I had this one, you know, there's a great, and sometimes it's just, they're kind of shy about it, wondering, you know, what kind of reaction they're going to get. I was, you know, there's this one night I was training with this teacher who was kind of famous for his use of kuzushi, breaking the structure of someone before you throw them, you know. And this guy was like 6 foot, you know, like over 2 meters tall. You know, he was about your size, you know. So he was a big one, and he knew how to use his body strength, and he was just picking me up, slamming, picking me up, slamming me, picking up, slamming me. It's like no subtlety whatsoever. And so the teacher comes by, and, you know, he turns to the teacher and goes, you know, Sensei, what do you think? And the teacher gives a Japanese smile, you know, one that doesn't reach the eyes, you know, very strong. And he walks, and I'm sitting here and I go, I know exactly what he meant, but if the teacher isn't going to point it out, it's not my place.
Yeah.
And I expected the entire night to just be, you know, again, all strength, all strength, all strength. But instead of coming back to training, the guy stands there for a second with you know, with this on his face, you know, and he goes over and he goes, Sensei, excuse me, can you please show me how to do it so it doesn't have to be strong? This time the smile is all over the teacher's face. He comes over, he shows what he's doing wrong, and for the rest of the night, I'm hitting the mat even harder. Go wham, you know. But, you know, again, it was just kind of a case where, you know, the guy, you know, the teacher, he didn't piss off the teacher, but he was used to a certain habit. So sometimes maybe you do have to, like, kind of ask for help. I got really good in Japan of, like, having the big doe eyes of just look at the teacher and like, okay, I'll show you what you're doing wrong. Yeah. And yeah, but that is a thing. One of my teachers, and my first teacher in Japan, you know, he pointed out, you know, at that time, you know, Soke Hatsumi would have people come up, demonstrate a technique, and then he would, like, show a variant to say practice it or something like that. And he said, you know, watch what happens between the foreigners and the Japanese. When the foreigners come up, Hatsumi Sensei says, you know, very good, keep going, such like that. When the Japanese come up, he starts pointing out mistakes after they show something. And he goes, he's training the next generation of Japanese teachers. And many of the foreigners have problems with being, you know, called out in front of everyone. And he said, yeah, if Hatsumi Sensei ever just turns to me and goes, okay, good, instead of pointing out my mistakes, I'm going in the corner and kill myself. You know? So
it's a radical difference in mindset. I mean, in the West, we kind of expect, like, okay, there's a teacher, we pay him, so he's supposed to teach us, and regardless of our mindset or attitude, you know, it's your job to teach us, and I am entitled to being taught whatever you've got, and I want it. That's not how it works. Now, obviously, I'm a Westerner, but that's not how I teach. My teaching has changed a lot over the past 30 years now that I've been teaching. And one of the main things is that I realized many years ago, fortunately for me and my students, that not everybody wants to train the way I do. Not everybody wants to commit as much, and that is fine. That is okay. There is a minimum, though. There's a minimum that everybody has to achieve, and on a technical level, obviously, like this is what we're teaching. So you really have to know, for instance, in your case, like if you don't know break falls, it's going to be really difficult to train the art. So there are technical minimums, but for me, the psychological or attitude minimum is that you've got to be willing to learn. And that starts by doing what I tell you to do. And not because you have to, but if you come to my class, I would say that the basic assumption is that you accept me as your teacher. So why would you not do what the teacher asks you to do? In particular, when I say, hey, you're having trouble with this, you're doing this wrong. This is the reason why, and this is the way to fix it. For as long as you don't fix this, you will not be able to progress in the art. I've said this literally as I'm explaining it now to so many people. And then I see it and I say, look, do this, do it for 2 weeks, every day for a few minutes, and it's going to help you. And I can tell each time it happens, the people who come back like a week later or 2 weeks later to class, and I see them do some exercises or the form or whatever. And I can clearly see, and I ask them, have you been practicing the thing that I showed you? Yes, I can tell. Okay, keep doing it, and we can move on to the next part. And then you see those who don't. And then I'm like, okay, you know, as long as your knee is in this position, you will never be able to get to where you want to go. Because if you keep doing it that way, you're going to blow out your knee eventually. That's what's going to happen. And I can't fix that until you fix this. And the same applies to when you show techniques. Like the example you gave, like if the guy had insisted on using strength, well, yeah, I can't teach you then because you don't want to do it the way that I'm teaching you. And that's a process. It's not just doing the technique a specific way. It's learning a lot of stuff that you need to be able to master, or at the very least become capable in first before you can do it like a high-level teacher does. Anyway, another long rant on my end.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the West, of course, there's a lot of, commercial dojos, commercial studios and stuff like that. And so people are just, used to, people just wanting the money,
Yeah.
And it's, none of my teachers in Japan survived off of teaching martial arts. It's very rare, very, very rare for someone to have a full-time job as a martial arts teacher. Here, of course, they go out and they try to recruit students. In Japan, it's more like, you find the teacher. I mean, like a classic example of, like you hear stories about like people having to sit in horse stance for an hour before they're accepted as, and it was pointed out to me, like the teacher can only teach so many students, and can't spread himself too thin. He doesn't want someone that's just going to like bail after a while. You gotta have to kind of prove yourself as, as a teacher. I was, and I'm kind of old school in that regards. I didn't really want to teach. I was kind of like guilted into it by one of my teachers in Japan. Like I was sitting around one day and with Oguri Sensei, he's passed away now. And Oguri Sensei was going, well, you're talking about moving back to America. And I go, yeah, I'm going to still practice Bujinkan, but I'm not going to teach it. I'm going to find an internal Chinese art because I'm not getting any younger. And I'll probably study that. And he goes, oh, you're not going to teach? I don't plan on. Next week, he sits me down with my friend Rich, and he turns to Rich and goes, and he's sitting there with his teacup, and he's like, Rich-san, you know that I really don't like teaching, but after all the kindness that Hatsumi Sensei and others have done to teach me, I feel it's my duty to teach others. How do you feel, Rich-san? And Rich is like, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I feel the same way. We got to give them back. Like, I am going to pee in your coffee if I get a chance, Rich. So I teach, but I'm teaching for the next generation. I don't want someone that's going to be around for 6 months and then bail. And I was once teaching a seminar out in New York, and some guy came up and says, yeah, I do these drills in class because, my students will not train on their own. So I have to do everything in class. Do you have any kind of, what do you do in that situation? What kind of drills do you have? And I look at them and go, I don't accept the type of people that won't train on their own. And that's it. I've got one guy, Daniel, and he just amazes me. Is like every time I show him something, he comes back, next time, and it's like, wow. I've got another guy who's, he's got problems just using his body. There's some people that are just a little bit uncomfortable in their skin. But when I show him something, he works that, he'll have trouble with class, all during class, I'm having to correct him and get him down. But like the next time he shows up in class and shows it, I can tell that he's put in like 10, 20 hours, in a week trying to get this one thing down. Yep. And yeah, this is how it is in Japan. They don't, it's rare to find someone that teaches for money. Well, they do take money, but they don't rely on the money to survive. And so they're able to just basically choose the people that they want, and tell them what they need to hear rather than they want to hear.
Yeah.
So
that's probably one of the big things that, as a Westerner, if you're used to commercial gyms or commercial dojos or like big organizations here in the West, where you go to like these big seminars and there's a whole circuit and there's this and there's that and there's a shop and there's what have you. And then you get there and you're face to face with a teacher who has really no incentive to take you on that you can entice him with. Is that it doesn't matter how much you want to pay. He's not there for the money. Yeah. He doesn't care about your money. It's very different than. And then once again, we get to the cultural differences. Is that, like you said, it's pretty rare in Japan that you find a commercial dojo or somebody teaching for a living. So maybe as soon as you get there, change your mindset. If you're there to learn, if you're just there, and that's something that I want to ask you too, is that a lot of guys that, well, I'm not going to say a lot. Okay, there are people out there who do go to Japan, who do train at whatever dojo that they're training at, but mainly as a photo op and as a reason to come back and say, look, everybody, this is my Instagram, this is my Facebook. Look, I was training with teacher XYZ, and he's a 10th Dan and this and that and so on, which has been happening for a long time. It's not just in Japan, it's all over the place. Could you talk a little bit about what that's like in Bujinkan? Because I know it happens a fair amount there.
Yes. It's a big thing in the Bujinkan, actually. I mean, I spent 15 years in Japan, saw a lot of this type of thing going on. I like to say that some people come to the fountain of knowledge to drink deeply. Some come to gargle, and some to have their picture taken next to the fountain.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a lot of people that are just too important to actually train when they go to Japan. It's. I mean, one of the big things are, people that make their living teaching martial arts in the Bujinkan. They are pretty much one of the ones that they will ignore. The Japanese teacher will pretty much ignore, because they've got, I mean, the whole problem is that when you put bread on the table by teaching, you're too cemented to the image as infallible. And if you get on the mat and you start training and the teacher comes over and starts pointing out all your mistakes, all the students you brought with you might be like, well, why are we training with him if he's making all these mistakes? So yeah, the Japanese just like, whatever, go on and treat, and train someone. And yeah, there's a whole bunch of, people show up for a few classes, get their picture taken, go home. And it's like, the Japanese are just like, yeah, good riddance. I mean, if I may name names, that was one of the things that happened with Stephen Hayes. Like when he was allowed to leave the Bujinkan, I was there for his second to last class, and it was a problem, because he really padded his resume in terms of his, he talked about like going to Japan twice a year, stuff like that. He didn't mention that the part of Japan that he went was his wife's hometown, which is about as far away, like between like Brussels and Moscow.
Yeah.
You know? So it's a good distance away. He didn't go to training when he went to Japan a lot of times. And as I said before, the second to last time he went to class, he hadn't been to Japan, he hadn't been training for years. I'm in training with, with Soke Hatsumi in the Hombu dojo, and he shows up. And the Japanese are like, what the heck? But again, the Japanese aren't big on screaming matches in public. So he comes in, he starts training, he shows pictures. The most, I won't talk about it, but, so he just shows up, takes pictures, and well, as he's training and stuff like that, and he leaves. And I get a call from my teacher at the time. He says, Roley-san, show up to the next class. Be there. It's going to be good. So I did. And like every other foreigner and Japanese are just lined up at home going, okay, this is going to be good. This is going to be good. This is going to be good. And he doesn't show up. And he goes home. He had one class in Japan, unannounced, without the Japanese having a chance to do anything. And of course, pictures all over the internet. And he's saying, people say that I don't train in Japan. Well, here's a picture of me. And that Soke Hatsumi was really pissed off, in the American sense. I mean, I use the term pissed off, not the British term, sometimes he gets a little bit pissed, but he was really mad about that. And so it kind of came up to the next time that he showed up, it didn't go as well. They were ready. They said, hey son, you're coming with us. They took him aside, let him know, you can resign or you can be thrown out. So yeah, there's a lot of people. And again, I've seen this time and time again, people bring their students and, they'll let the students and worse, they will go around correcting these students in another teacher's class.
Yeah.
And I'm just like,
yeah, that's a pretty big insult.
Yes. And I mean, there's a whole bunch of bozos that I could mention by name, but I won't. One guy, I mean, he shows up with a whole bunch of people, and this is a Gori Sensei's class, and he's just sitting back there like this at the back of the class, just sitting. And I notice he has got 3 knives on him, one of them a dagger. And it's like, wait a second. Okay, first of all, you're here with like 20 people, and this is Japan.
Yeah.
Who do you expect is going to attack a group of 20, And the guy is dead now, and I'm kind of glad, because it was just so rude. I've seen people take pictures in the middle of class, training's going on, and they'd all grab each other and boom, like that, in the middle of training. They're not getting out there and doing the stuff. They're just there for a photo op. And yeah, the Japanese will just ignore you. Some of the more direct will say, if you're not training, you'll have to, get outside, so it's for more room for everyone else. So yeah, but yeah, it's bad. I mean, there's plenty of people that, I can point to people that show up to Japan one time just to have their picture taken and maybe pick up a rank, and that's it. That's all you ever see. They take 1,000 pictures and they post it all over their website and their dojo. So it's really hard to for new students to kind of tell, well, is he actually like got a link to Japan,
Yeah.
or what, yeah. or was he just there for a week and had a big memory card on his phone?
I want to talk about that in a little bit, about the register of students, so something else. Could you talk a little bit about first getting to meet Hatsumi Sensei, and what is it like to train with him?
Okay, well, in general, many martial arts are kind of different in the way that you can get to them. I mean, there's one school that I tried to get into. That I had, one of the, my first job was near this famous school. I won't mention it, but it was like 500 years old, one of the big swordsman schools in Japan. And one of the teachers that I didn't work with him, but he was a teacher at the same school, said, oh, I can make an introduction. And I needed an introduction to basically get in the door. They turned me down because, again, JET program was only 3 years. And they said, yeah, 3 years isn't enough to complete your training. We're just going to have to turn you down. But thank you for your, interest. If you want to sit in on training, that's fine. So yeah, in that case, you needed an introduction. Other schools will actually list themselves in like magazines and stuff like that. You know, sometimes like Heat magazine will have a list of places that you can, you know, train at, you know, as part of, you know, back of the magazine. And of course they expect people to just like email them and say, I'd like to train and stuff like that. So it's a lot more easy in those cases to get in the door. In the case with Hatsumi Sensei, it was just basically, I showed up and I, you know, talked to people in America, and they said, well, just show up at his house. You know, the Bunjikan is a little bit different. Bunjikan is a little bit different. You know, people just do that. I knocked, I asked, you know, is this a good time? And he said, oh, come on in. And I talked, and he told me where training was and all that. And then he, you know, and a reporter showed up and he says, okay, you gotta leave now. I'm like, okay, fine, yes. So I got out of there. So yeah, you know, my impression of him, he was very down to earth with me. You know, he was just like, you know, you know, I mentioned someone's name, he goes, don't train with that person. And it's very down to earth, very, you know, nothing mystic or anything like that, nothing like that. I've been around him other times when people come in, they're basically like, we're not worthy, no. And he starts playing the fool in those cases. I mean, seriously, he, you know, when someone's like, oh, Hatsumi Sensei, oh, he'll pull out this little wind up bouncing penis and put it on the table. It's like, and the more you try to put him on the more you try to put him on a pedestal as a god, the more he's going to like do silly stuff, just because he's not going to be confined with your image of him.
Yeah.
So he's like all over the place. You know, sometimes he's very serious, but you know, if you try to make him into a god, he's going to like play the fool. And that's my impression of him. He's again, he stepped down from training, and he's not, you know, he's not a young anymore. And I'm afraid that we probably will not have him in the world too much longer. So, you know, I don't think many people are going to have a chance to meet him, but you know, he is a straightforward person when if you don't try to, you know, use him as your deity. You know, yeah. He doesn't want responsible for your miserable life, you know?
Right. That's a great answer. Something else, if correct me if I'm wrong, but if I remember it well, there is some sort of register of all the students in the Bunjikan?
Yes, no, and kind of.
Could you explain that a little bit?
Okay, so there is a list at the Hombu Dojo of people that have taken 5th Dan and above. Okay. So that's on record, and there's also boards with people of a certain rank. You know, we call them mega dans, you know, and stuff like that. So there's records of that, but you don't have to register everyone in, you know, in the. So if you're like a yellow belt, blue belt, you know, you might get a membership card that you can take to Japan, maybe not. So if 5th Dan is when you are a full instructor. So if you are an instructor in the Bunjikan, your name is on a book in Japan somewhere, and they could possibly find your name and check it. But it's kind of a, you know, it's kind of rare for that. It used to be that the 5th Dan test was only given in Japan. Now it's given by people of a certain rank, even outside the country. And I don't know if they're registering these people, if they're sending them in and getting certificates. That's one of the problems in the Bunjikan, is that there's a lot of people that think they're getting ranked from Japan, but actually it's certificates that their teachers make, and it's not registered in Japan. And this is, I mean, there's a, I'm going to name names here. There's a group called the International Bunjikan Dojo Association, run by a guy named Richard Van Donk. And it uses the name Bunjikan, but he has left the Bunjikan. And so you can still get a rank certificate from him saying International Bunjikan Dojo Association, but it's not, you know, he's got his own patches. You know, he's basically said, when Hatsumi Sensei stepped down from training, he said, you know, I'm just as good as any of these Japanese that are taking over. I'm going to follow what Hatsumi Sensei wants me to teach in my own way. So he's cut ties with Japan. He's giving certificates, and so it's like, it's caused a bit of problems when I've stepped up and said, well, if you got rank in this organization, it's not recognized in Japan, and some people resent that. So yes, some people are out there with certificates they think are registered in Japan, but they're not. But there is a registry, and they are sending out rank certificates. I got a couple. I don't normally give out rank, but a couple of my students wanted to take the 5th Dan test when they go to Japan, so I gave them 4th Dan, so that when they go, they can show the rank, from Japan, and take the 5th Dan test. And so yeah, right now with COVID, they're having trouble sending out certificates. But yes, you can get certificates from Japan, and if you get a certificate from Japan, it is registered there. And especially if you're 5th Dan, because that's an instructor level, you will be on a book somewhere. But from what I understand, it's kind of like haphazard. They did things down, so they might have trouble finding your name, but it is there.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because it kind of cuts through a lot of the nonsense about many of the claims that some people make. Is that, look, if you're claiming to be training with Hatsumi and you've got a degree from him, well, then you should be in the records, right? Even if it's difficult to find, well, yeah, but your name is going to be in there because they will they will mark it down. And we are old enough to remember the days before the internet, which many of the listeners might not. And I've had people come to my class and talk about how they trained with these mysterious teachers in garages and behind closed doors and this and that, and every single time, like, oh, interesting, okay, I might know them because I know a couple of guys who don't teach publicly. Who was it? And then, like, yeah, but they don't really want to have their name found out and this and that, so never anything. And wouldn't you know, it's almost always the stuff that they claim to have learned, stuff that you can see in videos or on DVDs or VHS tapes back in the day. So clearly guys who just learned something from video or whatever, and this is one of the reasons why I only have one what I call a finished student who trained with me for several years. I taught him everything he needs to know to continue his training. As far as I know, he doesn't. I think he stopped. I mean, I haven't heard from him in a long time. So, but and there's proof. There's a picture of me giving him the equivalent of a black belt, and I took that picture on purpose because if anybody questions him, I'm like, here, ask my teacher, and yes. And I will show this picture. Here's this picture. That's me and him. That's what I gave him, basically the instructor level certificate, if you will, in my own way. That is a far cry from having any random guy on the internet claiming that he learned with whoever he wants to claim he learned. It's going to be hard right now to do that without any proof. Back in like 20, 30 years ago, and even longer, yes, you could claim to go to Japan. There was no social media and this and that. Now going to Japan or China to train, and you're like, yeah, but I didn't take a single picture. And there's like, nobody knows where my teacher really lives. He lives up in the mountains, and it's blah blah blah, all a bunch of nonsense. So that's why I kind of like the idea of register, or at the very least some proof of, hey, this is my teacher. And there's very few. I mean, I've trained with a bunch of people. Some of them that are completely non-commercial because they have their training and experience from applying directly, as opposed to only working in the dojo or also being violence professionals, soldiers, and so on. And they don't advertise, and they only teach informally. Sure, so it does exist, but if it's always within Asian martial arts, then usually it's a bunch of nonsense.
As a general rule, if someone has been made a teacher rank, a teacher level, grading, their teacher will come forward and confer. And again, you could show up to a seminar with someone and just learn from them, and that's not really a relationship. But if they made you, a teacher level, then it's like, no, they're not private. They're not they're not off limits. The teacher, if the teacher is willing to let a person teach their art, then they will back them publicly. So if you get any, it's just a general rule of thumb, I don't know of any exceptions. If someone says, oh yes, I was made the soke of this system, but I can't seriously, there's this one guy who's claiming to be the soke of a system in America. And, again, there's no records whatsoever in Japan or America of this Japanese teacher existing.
Yeah.
His name is really weird Japanese. It's not a Japanese name and all that. And they're saying, well, no, he's a very private person. We can't, because of his family and such, we can't show you proof that he exists. If that's the case, that they're just lying. Treat them as lying, treat them as possibly worse than liars. Again, we're going to talk about child predators and martial arts. That's one of the easiest ways to get access to children. So yeah, if they claim that there seems to be more ninja masters living in the woods in America than in all of Japan. They all teach these people, from age 5 that nobody else on the block ever saw them. And ninjutsu is worse than other arts, I think, because if you go to a Taekwondo class, well, who's your teacher? Well, no, because of secrecy, I can't tell you.
Yeah.
They'll be like, what? But with ninjutsu, it's like, oh, ninjutsu is secret. So my art, and it's like, are you kidding me? Yes, no. You got websites, you got DVDs for sale, you're on social media, but only when we ask for proof is there a concern for privacy and secrecy. It does not make sense.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of a good segue into the next big topic. And this is one of the reasons, we've known each other for a long time, but it's one of the reasons why we were doing this interview right now, because there was this video that kind of went viral of you on, I think it was McDojo Live, which is a pretty big channel. And I'm going to put some links in the show notes for people, because it's a pretty long video, and you've got some other videos in which you talk about this, that for the full background, people can get that. So go through the show notes for that. But could you just kind of give a little bit of an introduction as to what you've been doing against pedophilia and child abuse in the martial arts? Okay,
well, basically, I started out on internet message boards, back when AOL was cool. Living in Japan, of course, a lot of people, went for me to questions, and I soon found that there's a lot of people that were frauds, and they did it to be for attention. So they just didn't shut up. They were very, very active, because they wanted attention. That's why people lie about martial arts. They want attention, and they didn't know what they're talking about, of course. So I got kind of like a reputation of busting frauds, which, again, the Black Dragon Fighting Society is like, geez, in the video you can talk, you can hear my opinion of them in the video from McDojo Live. But then I kind of the thing is that I found out that a lot of frauds in martial arts, it's not every fraud, but it's a high percentage, are actually doing this to get access to children. Predators go where the prey is. If you want to go, a place with a lot of kids, well, you could be a school teacher, but you got to go through a lot of training, schooling, preparation. 2, they've got systems in place in schools to kind of catch teachers like that. And it doesn't work all the time, but it's, so it's a lot more time and effort. You could actually go through 5 years or so to actually become a black belt and an instructor, but they don't want to put in that time. So they will watch a few videos, declare that they're the head of, Who Flung Poo and whatever, or What's the Matter Ru Jiu-Jitsu, or make up their own a false history, of being trained by a ninja master or whatever, and then set themselves up in a dojo somewhere and start attracting students. So yeah, I got kind of pulled into the whole pedophilia thing, going after pedophiles. just because I kept running across him. And after talking with a victim of a martial arts teacher that molested her, it's like, I can't turn a blind eye to this. You know, I've got to do something. And yeah, you know, people that, if people knew just how bad the situation was in martial arts, they probably wouldn't have their kids in any classes. I mean, it's, we took down one guy. There's a martial arts group on Facebook, BS Martial Arts. Of course, not BS, but full, you know, yeah. BS Martial Arts. And we found this guy named Vern Van Zyl. And Ron Collins, actually, you know, who's in the video from McDoja Life, actually helped us, you know, find the guy. He, you know, by mistake, you know, the guy was on Facebook under assumed name. Ron basically made a mistake and revealed who he really was with a little bit of digging. You know, this guy's name is Vern Van Zyl, and he's a Category 3 sex offender. Category 3 being the most likely to do it again. And not only was he setting up a what he called an MMA mixed martial arts dojo, you know, in his house, he was specifically marketing his class for young girls. He had one of his students have a YouTube channel called MMA Girl. She was like, ah! So that, you know, we didn't know what we were doing. This was like the first time. We didn't know what we were doing. We almost destroyed the case, because when we nailed him, he's out of New York, and there's no law, nothing preventing a Category 3 sex offender with all of his arrests involving children from teaching children's classes. There was no law, no prohibition, nothing preventing him from having a class with young girls in it.
I just want to interject.
Well, we finally nailed him.
Is that for the non-American audience, is that you don't just get that label class 3 sex offender by accident. This is like official records. You have to be, you know, convicted of a crime and so on. So what Don is talking about here is not it's not opinion. This is a stated fact. It's somebody who was convicted for abusing and molesting or raping children and so on. So this is a critical point to understand, because we're not talking, well, you know, this guy gave off a funny vibe and I don't trust it. No. It's something else. That's somebody who already has committed that crime. So I want to make that clear for the people who don't know what that term means. Go ahead.
A site run by the New York government as a sex offender with a list of his crimes and details involving children, and right there on the official website it says Category 3, which, you know, again, Category 3 being the most likely to do it again. But there's no law in New York State preventing him from teaching children. What we finally nailed him on was, as part of his parole, part of his conditions for release, he had to register every social media and internet presence that he had, and he didn't do that. And that's what we actually sent him back to jail for a while for. And we're watching for him. You know, we're keeping an eye out because we're worried. And he doesn't seem to have set up another class yet. He seemed to have learned his lesson, hopefully. But I almost literally cried when I saw the pictures of him rolling around. It was terrifying. Yeah. Knowing what I did about him. And yeah, and so yeah, we're you know, again, BS martial arts, you know, we make fun of people that take themselves too seriously, you know, incompetence. We expose frauds, but whenever there's somebody that, you know, touches children, that's what we really go after. I mean, we've got people all over the world with a lot of resources. We know now who to contact, you know, in law enforcement, and what type of evidence they need. And that's eventually, with the video, the Black Dragons and Ron Collins, that's eventually what happened to Ron Collins, is that, you know, he was sent to a mental institution and later went out and bought a pistol. And you can't do that in America. So some of the guys, not me, actually, it wasn't me, even though he was talking about coming out to Colorado again, and well, like, I've got a pistol, I'm coming to Colorado. Even though it was, like he was talking about me, it was guys on the East Coast, because he would make these videos, post them about 2:00 his time. So by the time I woke up here in Colorado, it was like 2 hours earlier on the East Coast. So they had a chance to, call the local law enforcement and say, you've got a guy that was, spent time in a mental hospital, that's bought a gun and making noises about, his haters and what he's going to do to them. And yeah, so now he's in federal prison for that. And, we've done things with other people that, have made the mistake, because a lot of times when someone goes to prison for touching children, one of the requirements when they get out is like no social media, no social media whatsoever, because that's how they, contact children. So when we find someone, we immediately just, okay, is this part of his patrol? And a lot of times it's like, nope, they're not supposed to be on Facebook, and they get, sent back to prison. And I've got a lot of enemies doing this, but it's not something that I can walk away from now.
No, I understand that. And could you talk a little bit about the video that went viral? What happened there? If I'm, quickly,
Okay.
if I'm, no, go ahead. You go ahead. It's easier.
Okay. Again, there's, you can see the video itself. You're going to link to it. I put together an 18-minute video where I talk about it. But essentially, Ron was a guy that had a conviction for trying to drug a underage girl so he could have his way with her, and he was a fake. And of course, I'm not afraid to talk about him. And after I moved back to Japan, he was making a lot of noise about how I'm too scared to face him. And I just arranged to have a seminar in Lexington the same weekend that he was going to be, at the Black Dragon Fighting Society little meet there at the same city, same time. And, I said, if you really want to challenge me, I'm going to be right here. And again, that's the lead up for the video. And actually what happened was that Ron put up proof that it was actually organized by Frank Dukes. Frank Dukes got people to say, and they all went out with Ron and started this. Of course, Dukes wouldn't go himself. He wouldn't, face me himself. He's very big on sending other people. And you can see the videos, they rolled in expecting me to be like, oh. But it didn't go as planned. I looked at them and I gave them my honest opinion. And when Ron said, you ain't got, it in you to fight me, I walked out on the mat and said, okay, here we go. And again, it's 15 minutes, no fighting goes on. At the end, Ron is literally hugging himself in fear, talking about suing me, and he walks out. And I mean, they never go through. It's just because, the type of people that challenge other people on the internet are just not the type that really can, cash the checks that their mouth writes. Yeah. The ones, you and I know people that are really, really dangerous, really, really good. They don't do that sort of thing. They don't challenge people to fights over things said on the internet. And a lot of people get challenged. I'm one of the ones, okay, if you want to do it, I don't challenge people, but if they challenge me, I'm like, okay, fine. But so far, not one person has followed through, not one. I mean, I can, tons of people, it's always, and whenever, I get it, it's a defense mechanism, I talk about, well, if I point out that the Japanese name of their teacher isn't Japanese and that it actually makes, it's actually kind of silly, they'll say, well, you wouldn't dare say that to my face. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to travel out there, but if you come out here, look what happened to the Black Dragons. I said it right to their face. It's a defensive thing. Like, you guys are cowards. You won't say that to my face. You won't fly. I mean, people expect, other people to fly halfway around the world and say, you're a fake, and yeah, it's a defensive mechanism. But, again, I've been challenged. I mean, one guy, Lee Morier, or whatever, like twice, and both times he bailed. Yeah, it just, the people that make challenges, do it just to like, try to save face, come and say that to my face. I'll be out there and I'll fight you and like that. Okay, fine. And of course, usually they realize this is not a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
what I found striking is that,
challenging people.
Go ahead. We've got a little bit of a delay here on the recording.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm the first to say that, two grown men fighting over something on the internet is silly. I won't challenge people, but if they challenge me, typically, I'll do it. I mean, Frank Dukes told people that he wanted to fight me, but I was ducking him. I'm like, okay, I'll fight Frank Dukes. That didn't work out. He basically wants $250,000 before he'll get in the ring. But yeah,
which is
people
nonsense.
that challenge other.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's silly, but yeah.
The funny thing that I saw. Go ahead. Yeah, sorry. So for people who don't know, I'm in Europe. Don is in the US, so we've got a little bit of lag here on the connection, and sometimes it's kind of like cross talking. But what I found funny about the video that went viral is that, I mean, it was supposed to be the one guy showing up because he's the guy who challenged, but they turned up with like 4 or 5 people, I think, and they tried to get something going. There's a few guys that came up to you a little bit, but for me, it looked very much like the schoolyard tussles that you see in middle school or even high school. It's like, you looked at my girlfriend and that kind of nonsense. I'm like, guys, if you're an adult and this is the nonsense that you're doing, there's something inherently wrong with your worldview. And if you have an inkling of what true violence can actually be like, you wouldn't put your life on the line for something as stupid as that. You wouldn't be making stupid claims. You wouldn't be arguing over the internet and so on. I've had people come after me online, et cetera, et cetera. I've got people who for years tried to come after me, and I typically just ignore it. And I'm like, you do you. I'll be doing my own stuff here. And in the meantime, vaya con Dios, live your life. If for some reason you're upset with me that I don't really understand, okay, well, whatever. But overall, I mean, like you said, typically these are not the hardcore training people, nor the people with a lot of experiences in actual real violence. I'm sure there are exceptions. I've met some people who would actually follow through with that. But then again, you have to work at getting them to that point. So, so what's the status with Collins right now?
He's in federal prison. Again, he, as I said, he went out and bought a pistol, lied on the federal forum, and that is a major felony in the United States because we don't like people that have been committed to mental institutions buying firearms. I mean, it's a bad idea. So he's basically, until like summer of next year, he's in federal prison.
Okay.
And that's it. I mean, yeah. Not only did he buy a pistol, but he put up videos of himself with the pistol. And it's like, yeah, that's all the prosecutors needed. So,
yeah, I can imagine.
He'll come out. Yeah, he'll be out in a little over a year and a half. I'm sure that he'll have great stories about his cage matches behind bars.
Yeah.
So, but he's gone for now.
Well, we're going to head on over to the Patreon bonus episode soon, but there was one question from one of my patrons that I think kind of fits in here. Wiebe asked how to determine if a club is safe emotionally, physically, and from sexual predators, financial scams, all that. But let's say in particular when it comes to the kind of people that you're talking about here who want to abuse children via martial arts. How can parents who are listening to this keep their children safe from that? What are some of the tips that you might be able to give them so they know what to look for?
Well, I could talk an entire hour about all the different problems, but a few things are, again, a lot of wall candy, a lot of it attempt to impress people with how macho they are, because that seemed to be the type of people that I run across. Do not treat it as daycare. I mean, that's the big problem is a lot of people will just like drop their kids off, come back 3 hours later, and and it's daycare. It's a way of getting rid of the kids. In fact, some of the schools around here during summer vacations will actually have like all-day camps, so parents can drop their kids off all day. That's just a recipe for disaster. Watch classes at least a few times and see if there's, I mean, some people will give off vibes. I mean, you know, they're a little bit too touchy-feely with the kids, a little, you know, actually openly flirt with 12-year-olds. It's have a more active part of your kids' martial arts classes. Check the references, and it's getting hard to check references because, again, you know, you could join the Black Dragon Fighting Society. You know, you just send them the money, they'll send you a certificate, and then you'll be listed on their site. Doesn't mean that they've ever even met you. And there's a lot of these things. One guy that's, you know, on my radar right now, his name is Ralph Hall. He just went through a, you know, home study course, used that thing, told everyone it was a 10th Dan in the Bujinkan, and then seduced one of the students. If their story sounds like really, if they're trying to impress you with their story about how macho they were, that's the biggest red flag that I can easily say. I mean, if they're like, I've been training in martial arts for 20 years, I really like it, and I like, you know, teaching, you know, kids and families stuff, that sounds okay to me. If they're talking about, yes, well, I use this art in both Iraq and Afghanistan to kill people barehanded as part of my Rangers, that's a red flag. I mean, he's trying to impress you how macho he is. And those people have got like deep-seated problems that make them want to prove their manlyhood, but they can't handle real adult women. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's,
you know, check the references and be prepared for like a circle. You know, like, oh yeah, I'm recognized by this society. Well, who are they recognized by? This society and this society, and it's a whole circle of everyone validating everyone, and that's the problem with the martial arts right now. So if there's too much wall candy, too many organizations and stuff like that, and they won't let you teach, you know, contact their former teachers, that's a red sign. I mean, they might actually have a lot of experience with martial arts. They might be a skilled martial artist, but if they did something and their former teacher is going to know about it, you know, their former student, you know, there are teachers that basically have gone through 10 years or more of training, and then they are qualified, but, you know, they seduced a student, and everyone in the organization is going to know about them.
Oh, no, I don't know if you can hear me, but we're kind of, I kind of missed the last 30 seconds about the screen froze up, and I have no audio or video. Don't know if you can hear me.
Hello?
Okay.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Because the connection was completely lost.
Yeah.
And I hope we're still recording.
Okay.
It says we're recording. We'll see when I download the recording. Because I lost kind of like a minute here. It was fully gone. So you're kind of recapping everything, the advice.
Okay. Right. Okay. So listen to your gut. If there's anything about the teacher that you don't, that doesn't seem right, walk away. Just like, you know, being in contact, or they won't let you contact the people that taught.
All right, so folks, we just had an internet panic attack because my Wi-Fi apparently decided that it didn't want to keep on with this interview. So we had to restart the Zoom call and the recording. So there's a little bit of a hiccup here, but we were pretty much at the end of the main section of the public episode here. Before we get on to the Patreon bonus episode, a quick thing. Could you really quickly say, how did you get started translating books, and what kind of books do you translate? Because that's a question that people might want to know.
Well, I kind of just started translating things on my own in Japan related to ninjutsu. And actually, I translated the Shoninki while I was in Japan, kind of. And it was my friend Rich, the guy whose coffee I'm going to pee in. that saw it, and he's like, Don, you've got to put this out, and like this, you need to publish this, because he knew guys that were basically in intelligence in the Army, and he said this would be a great value to them. I go, okay. And when I came back to America, it's like, okay, I just kind of like fell into it. Aside from the translating jobs I was doing, most of my stuff is related to martial arts and ninjutsu in particular. Bansen Shukai, 17th century texts on ninjutsu, things like that. I just don't like the fact that there's so much BS out there about ninjutsu, So I hope to put out good information to counter all the mistaken stuff. I mean, the stuff about, like them running around in black outfits, or when the samurai drew his sword, he couldn't put it back in his scabbard without drawing blood, things like that. So yeah, I publish my own stuff. I'm going to put out a lot more stuff, just because there's a lot of stuff that needs to be said. I can't put it any better than that. So
yeah, and this is one of the things that one of my teachers translates ancient Chinese texts in general, but also obviously related to martial arts. And this is one of the comments that he made, is that, and I believe this is true, that very, very often when you read a book that is a translation of an ancient Japanese, Chinese, or whatever text, it may be written by somebody who is an excellent translator, but because they lack training in the topic that they're translating, the translation often isn't very helpful, and it becomes obscure and vague, or it brings across certain nuances that aren't really there, which if you train in the art, and vice versa. They neglect to specify certain things that if you take one class, right away that this is what it's about. It's too abstract for them because they don't practice, or they haven't practiced long enough or at a high enough level. And that's why I wanted to mention it, because you've been training for a very long time, lived in Japan. You obviously you have a very high level, recognized by the Japanese government that the language. So that's why I wanted to mention that. Where can people find the books you've translated?
Well, you can look for my name on Amazon. I also have a website, coloradospringsninjutsu.com. Right now, I'm mainly putting out Kindle books, translations of martial arts treatises, just because it was pointed out to me by someone saying it would actually be nice to have Japanese martial arts books like the Book of Five Rings translated by someone that does martial arts. Not for someone that does business, not for someone that wants to new age, finding yourself. It'd be nice if there was a book about swordsmanship translated by someone that's actually trained with the sword in Japan. So yeah, it's coloradospringsninjutsu.com, or Amazon has got the Kindle books and a few of my physical copies. I'm moving more and more towards selling on Amazon now, just because it's easier to just to do it through them.
Yeah. So coloradosninjutsu.com is your main website. That's where people can reach you.
Yes, I haven't been able to update it for a while, but I will be updating it with new books and stuff like that. But there are some of my older stuff is up and listed on the website right now, and probably, hopefully, by the end of the month, I'll be able to update with even more books. But all of my new stuff is on Amazon.
Okay, great. And for the listeners, I will put a direct link to that at wimsblog.com/57. That's where the show notes are, and then you can find everything there and directly get to Don's stuff. I'll also link to the Amazon page, so that might be easier. Right, so we are going to roll right into the Patreon bonus episode, but before that, I'm going to quickly thank Don for being such an awesome guest and answering all my questions and sharing your experience with us. Everybody else, as always, thank you for your support. You can obviously like, share, subscribe, join me on social media, all that stuff, all the links in the show notes. And I'm working on a few other guests as well. I've got one confirmation already, Michael Janich, which some of you might know, and I'm working on some big names that I'm like, got nothing to lose. So I asked a very well-known martial arts practitioner and actor if he wanted to be on the podcast. Shoot for the stars. We'll see where we end up. All right, folks. Don, thanks again. And everybody else, take care out there.